a lot of people that are new to racing really struggle with that. And that's one of the things that I do think really struggle with, is how do they calm the voice down? That internal dialogue is the ultimate enemy, man. Like, everyone knows it. If you've ever been in a hard place, or in between a rock and a hard place, if you sat and actually listened to yourself, if you could write those thoughts down on a piece of paper, they are horrible, horrible thoughts to have. And to overcome that, like I say, it takes some education. You need to be educated on why these thoughts influence our feelings. You need to kind of understand a bit more about, like I say, anxiety, which is our fight or flight response. You know, you need to it's not all from the amygdala, by the way, which is what everyone kind of thinks, but you know, you need to understand a bit more about the fight or flight system, what it's really doing. In its easiest form, it's just dumping adrenaline into your body. And that's why we get them weird sort of like tingly sensations in the hands. Maybe you get a bit shaky. Maybe your legs don't feel as solid when you're standing on them. Your stomach churns. You know, all those sort of wonderful feelings. I mean, they're not wonderful, but they are, you know, from that aspect. Once you understand that all it is really is your body has just dumped a whole load of adrenaline, and you can go, okay, I'm anxious. And also accepting the fact that you're anxious. The worst thing you can do is try and fight it as well. And everyone knows that from a psychological, you know, component. If you start telling yourself, I'm not anxious, I'm not scared, I'm not afraid, and then you've got all these weird sensations going on, your mind is ultimately going to go, well, if you're not anxious, then there must be something wrong. And essentially what the mind does is it either looks externally for threats, and if it can't find anything external, it'll look internal. And then that's when you start hearing about people saying, oh, oof, my heart rate's up a bit, you know, I don't really feel that well. And it's like, it's just adrenaline. That's all your body's doing. It's just sent a wee signal because of a thought, and it's all influenced by a thought. And then the moment that thought kicks off, it dumps that adrenaline, your body goes into overdrive. And honestly, it can be chaos trying to work your way through that on your own. But with a bit of education and a bit of time and a bit of understanding of realizing, well, actually, yeah, I'm anxious. Okay, I know why I'm feeling shaky now, and that's not a problem, and accepting it. And actually, the quicker you can accept that you're anxious, the quicker usually anxiety sort of disappears.
Geez, that's fascinating. What are some sort of conversations you have with athletes? I understand we've still got some topics to get back to, but we will.
Yeah, I know.
This one's so fascinating because I think everyone feels this in all walks of life, whether it's sport or a job interview or potentially public speaking,
Podcast.
all those things. Like, it's podcast. Yeah, I was a lot more nervous for my first podcast than whatever. This is 140 odd. Definitely. Absolutely. And it's doing those reps. I like to call it reps. And that's why I think some sportsmen can go over and do other things because they know what the blueprint is. It's actually not rocket science. No. It's doing the reps. It's doing hard things. It's sacrificing. And then you do get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's what Greg was. Just comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because I picked his brain. I'm like, dude, it's tough for me racing at home. I wanted to perform. My family was there. Obviously, that's the race I want to do well at. There's more distractions. And you just seem to just excel there. I think there was a bit of chemical difference between our brains. I do think that his process needed to be different to mine to perform at an optimum level. And that's back to, you know, there's no one size fits all. But yeah, so you're working holistically with your athletes on this physical side, but you're not ignoring the mental side. You can do all the work you want, but if the mental side is not quite there that day, that can be the deterrent of good results.
100%. I mean, look, you cannot underestimate the power of the mind as such. And for all the training in the world, for all the time in the gym, for all the VO2 max intervals, for all the, you know, the lactate samples, for all the SMO2 samples, if a person does not have that psychological edge, they will not be able to perform. It's arguably, it's up there as one of the most crucial components that a person can develop. And like I say, you know, some people are more mentally robust. I have seen that. Some people have the ability to, you know, kind of shake it off, and some people don't. You know, and
genetically, you're of the belief that they're born with a little bit
Yeah,
more, or that's
yeah,
part of their personality traits that they can handle certain things.
yeah. So once again, not to get overly, um, crazy on the subject, but environmental factors basically shape how we interpret things. So this can go right back to early age, and it could even be that your parents were. And by the way, anxiety is a relatively new thing. In terms of how we speak about it in this modern day and age, our parents, probably never spoke about it. Well, in fact, my mum did. My mum's a psychologist, and so is my dad. So I have a good understanding of what they do, and this was always a big thing in our house. But it wasn't something that was talked about a lot back in the day, and therefore, if your mother was anxious and you were at home and you were a wee boy or a wee lass, you'll have picked up on the fact that she was anxious subconsciously, and maybe she didn't know how to process that, and maybe your dad didn't know how to process that, and that can sometimes come across as whether they were angry or upset, a bit more. If you grow up in that type of environment, you're going to be subjected to most likely experiencing anxiety, in your sort of teens or your early 20s. Versus if you grow up in a house and, the family's, well educated on what anxiety feels like and what it does and how that shapes the environment in which you grow up in that household. There's also good evidence at the moment to suggest that you're not going to most likely be one of those anxious people. And that's the reason why I think anxiety is, huge in today's age. Almost everybody I speak to has some form of daily anxiety, whether it be, GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, or some people have panic disorder, and some people have phobias. Phobias are a big thing. People are afraid of planes, cats, dogs. They're actually all a form of, anxiety. It's a really big, once again, fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing some light on that. I mean, and to me, I kind of look at it as you're anxious about a future problem, correct? If I mean, I'm dumbing it
Mm-hmm.
down to the, in
Mm-hmm.
a race would be you're anxious, you're fearful of the race, the outcome. Are you going to crash? Are you going to perform? There's all these things that I guess, yeah, with thought and proper process, you can control or at least accept, deal with it. Everyone has it. Like if we get back to the performance side and your athletes, like, and maybe then move on to your big passion is obviously trying to figure out how to train for these things, and part of me thinks if you do the work and your training's correct, like I think that's a pill to help as well. Not a pill, literally, but figuratively. Like if I get to a race and I've done the work, I'm more sort of comfortable, confident, that hopefully with the correct processes, it'll unfold closer to what I want because I've done the work.
Yeah, I mean, it's all building blocks. Like you say, if you know, and this is what the great thing about performance testing is, and why I do advocate for a larger sort of scope of performance testing. Because if you're basing things off just, 6-second power test, and you're basing things off an FTP test or critical power test, and then having sort of strength elements there, like your sort of 3 or 1 rep max, if they don't increase that much across that short scope of board. So, for instance, if you've got an athlete, let's call it athlete A, and as a coach, all you're doing is measuring functional threshold power over a 20-minute test, and you manage their strength, and what you're looking at is their 1 rep max across a back squat, a deadlift, and a bench press. They've only got 2 things that they can realistically improve on. And if they don't improve on the 2 things, well, that's drastic for their confidence, because now they're like, oh, well, my performance hasn't increased. I clearly haven't got any better, which obviously means my race results are not going to be any better. And already they're on the back foot psychologically. Whereas, like I say, when you can include a multifaceted, broad range of, sort of performance, i.e., did their strengths get a bit better? Potentially, can you measure that a bit better? Did muscular endurance get better? Did their VLA, for instance, their VLA max, did that come down or did that come up because both the performance increase? Did their VO2 increase? Did their oxygen consumption at anaerobic threshold increase? Their VO2 max might have not increased, but their oxygen consumption at anaerobic threshold increased. That's a performance indicator. Their ability to utilize fat as a fuel source, is that better? Brilliant, outstanding. Their ability to consume a higher amount of carbohydrates, per hour, did that increase? Perfect. you know, did they? And what this means, what all of this really means, is they have the ability to concentrate more. They have more energy on board. Their ability to utilize fuel is better. Their ability to contract muscle fibers is better. There's a huge element within all of that testing that you can then say, well, your performance is night and day from where it was. Whereas if you've got a very sort of minimalistic approach to testing and they don't really increase across those things, you have the potential to ruin a person's psychology before they even begin. And it's something that I like to tell all my athletes that I do work with, and I do spend a lot of time working with them psychologically, and speaking with them and letting them know that, yeah, look, your performance, and I have never not increased anyone's performance. I have always made people fitter, faster, stronger, and I'm quite, but that isn't like some bold statement to say that I can do this across the board, regardless of who it is. It just means that I have such a wide net of metrics that I do track that I can honestly say that every single person I've worked with, I've made their performance, their physical performance better. Have I helped people psychologically? Yes, I do help people try and process, racing down. Maybe someone has a terrible race run. And this brings me to another point. If all you're looking at is time, as to how well that athlete performed, how do you then debrief them the day after the race? So I have this whole process. It's essentially a bunch of questionnaires that they answer pre-race and post-race. And I think it's super important for an external coach to have that ability to do so. Because if an athlete has a terrible run, they'll just come down and tell you, look, I've had a terrible run. My ride was shit. I did terrible. That's that. And they're left with that feeling of, feeling bad because they didn't perform the way they wanted to. Whereas if you can then break it down to, how were you feeling physically? Physically, I felt strong. How did you feel nutritionally? I probably could have ate a bit more. How was the bike setup? I'll be honest with you, man. I think my fork pressures were a bit too high, up front. Wasn't quite happy with them. Track conditions. How did you favour the track conditions? I don't like the rain. Okay, perfect. Where were you mentally? Out of 10, I was a 7. Now all of a sudden, when it comes to Monday's debrief, and they say, I just had a terrible run, and you pull up the sheet and you go, yeah, I'm not surprised. Like, all of these things are suboptimal. How can you expect, at the end of the day, if you want to win a World Cup now, you have to have the best week, let alone the best day before. Everything has to be working for you, in order for you to get that 1%, because ultimately that's what we're after, right? Like, there is no huge margins in downhill anymore. There isn't huge margins in enduro either. We're talking about 1%. And it's like, well, where do you find that 1%? And I like to use this story. So prior to 2007 British cycling, they brought in a new sports scientist, head of sports science. And he came in and he didn't even look at anything physical. He looked at their skin suits. He used a different material. He looked at their bikes. He got them a better bike fit. They spent hours in the wind tunnel. He painted the interior of the bus white so that they could spot dust in case there was any dust, because that would affect, obviously, the air, the quality of the air inside the bus. They measured the thickness of the pillows, so that they could have each person had individual pillows, so that when they slept with these pillows so that they were in an optimal position for sleep. We haven't even touched on anything physical. And that year we took the most Olympic medals. I think it was Beijing.
No way.
So what I mean is, while you're focusing on all of these, physical components, don't forget the psychological components, the environmental components, and don't allow, any athlete to kind of dictate what their performance was, because, like I say, it's just human nature. They'll automatically go to, well, it was terrible. When chances are, there are probably a lot of things that could have been better, and that's what you need to find out.